Once upon a time,
in a land far away.
I'm Katrina.
And I'm Geoff.
This is the Fairy Tellers Podcast.
Myth, legend, folklore, fable.
We explore what they say about cultures then and now,
Grab a hot cup of cocoa and a comfy seat
while we tell you a tale. Welcome back to the podcast. We made it through the longest of Januaries.
We did. It seems like every January, every year is just a ridiculously long. It's a month that defies time and our sensation of it because it is simultaneously like the longest month of the year by feel and also goes by so fast in retrospect. You know what I mean? It's like having children. The days are long, but the years are short. Like the minutes of January are long, the days are long, but the month itself is short.
Yeah, like literally, because at least in like the Northern Hemisphere, it's like the darkest days, the coldest days, the fun and magic of like the beginning of like the winter season that's encompassed with all of like the like different holidays surrounding it. There's all that fun and magic. And then in January, you're like, well, I guess we're still alive through the winter. And so you just keep going. And then usually when I was living in kind of like a colder, snowier place than I'm currently living in Ohio, February always seemed like the longest month to me, which is hilarious, obviously, because it's
the absolute
technically
shortest.
The shortest month that we have. But I was just trying so hard to like will myself to make it to March out of the cold. And I saw some buds starting to form on the end of trees yesterday. And I was like, oh, yes, thank you. I needed this. I need little signs that like spring is coming back. It is going to come back. It is going to happen to me. So I've made it through January. We've all made it through January. And now onward and upward.
That was a Matt Berry line reading if I ever heard one. Onward and upward.
So we, like most people, have been thinking about the political landscape in the US the last couple of days, weeks, and months. And this episode isn't going to get wildly political. We know that most people are trying to escape from the madness by relaxing with their favorite podcasts. Or they might not be in the United States and as close to what's going on as we are. And or we, on the Fairy Tellers podcast, aren't political scholars. This is not a political commentary podcast.
The one thing that this podcast is not.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for this episode, like current events commentary. Anyway,
yes.
Sorry. The what we are a lot of things, but yes, in this moment, no, we are not that.
So this episode, we're going to be retelling and talking about a tale that is spiritually important to me. It's not a religious story at all, but I think about this story all the time and the philosophical nature of it and how it speaks to my spirit. But before it became a story that spoke to my spirit, it actually had different iterations. So we're going to be talking about the journey of the story Stone Soup. So this is a tale that I'm sure the majority of people are familiar with in some way because it's been reproduced so many times in popular culture. In the 1970s, Disney had a book that came out with the story of, and it was called Button Soup. As we will learn, the item that goes into the soup to start off the soup, it changes from tale to tale, but it's essentially the same story, whatever the item is. But this story was called Button Soup, and Daisy Duck and like the whole gang, they're trying to like trick him into not hoarding food and resources. And then in the 90s, there was a Canadian author who wrote a version called Bone Button Borscht, which actually has a Jewish Hanukkah twist to it. The author didn't like the lack of Hanukkah stories for kids, like things that were like themed around like Hanukkah, knew the story of Stone Soup and felt like it went really well with the holiday of Hanukkah, the idea of like not hoarding resources being more when you're together. Felt like, oh, this story resonates. And so that apparently also there's like a version of that tale written by that author that gets like read over the radio usually on like the first night of Hanukkah in Canada. I don't know if that's still happening because that was written down in like the 90s. And the one that I'm the most familiar with in my adult life, because I would read this to preschoolers when I was a preschool teacher, was written by John J. Muth, who published his tale of Stone Soup in 2003. He also has written Zen shorts. If anybody's familiar with Stillwater, I think they recently made like a PBS cartoon based on like Stillwater, who's a panda Zen master. So that author, he has written several different books. And so what was interesting about his version of Stone Soup was that he set it in China and very much like tonally changed the tale as well. And it was interesting because like it was a big shift away from this story, which very much the history of it is European. And he changed it into something that like then like when I was reintroduced to it like as an adult and read his version of it, I was like, oh, this is a really beautiful, like amazing story. But also pop culture wise, PBS shows like Between the Lions. Did you ever watch Read Between the Lions?
I did not. I've never even heard of it.
Between the Lions. It was very much a kind of like Reading Rainbow-esque type of a program where it was like these lion parents, like I think they owned like a library or something, but it would be a different book every week. So they did an episode that included Stone Soup, Little House on the Prairie, and Robot Chicken. I bet you didn't think you'd hear those two shows.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. Like the fact those two shows are something that you would not expect them to have anything in common with one another. Yeah. And yet this is the tale that has brought them both in alignment. And I think that's beautiful. It
is. It's so beautiful. They created like episodes with this kind of motif at like the center of it. And then I believe it was like most recently, who knows, there might have been a reference made more recently to it in pop culture. I don't know. But one of the more recent is in The Walking Dead. A character makes a reference to this story and kind of like throws it out there of like, oh, of course we all know this story. It's been the inspiration for like different plays, all of that kind of like modern takes and stuff aside, backing up history of this story, earliest versions of this tale go back to the late 1700s in France. And this story must have really resonated with people because versions have been found in the United States in the early 1800s. So not that long after it was like written down in France, it was also written down in the United States. There are written versions in Italy, Sweden, Russia, England. It kind of went all over the place, but it's hard to tell if those stories all originated by the first telling of the tale or the first writing of like the tale down in France, or if all these tales were kind of collected around the same time because tales were being collected in the early, mid, and late 1800s, kind of all over Europe at the time.
Fair enough.
Or if the stories existed orally for much longer or some hybrid of those reasons. But either way, the story really had legs. It really, really resonated with people. And the versions would still vary from each other very much, usually in who the main characters were and who they were trying to get soup from, which is also very interesting because of the types of characters that they'll pick. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, I was going to point out ATU type. We have the ATU type for this story because, of course, I do. Because I know that everybody is like sitting, listening right now going, gee, I really hope Katrina knows what the ATU type is.
Don't worry. She does. She knows it.
We're jonesing for that ATU type. It is ATU type 1548 Stone Soup, named, of course, for the most famous iteration of the tale. and it belongs in the greater ATU Index under stories about the clever man. Usually it's like tales, and that's why we're talking about this and pointing this out, is because these are usually tales where some really clever man is tricking people who are seen as like dumb out of something. And that goes into how this tale has changed from what it was being told and passed around to all these people to what it's become today and what it's come to like symbolize to people. Because as we go through the tale, you'll see that when I'm talking about, oh, this tale has like a spiritual significance and message for me, it not based on these early tales of tricking other people. So because the story of Stone Soup is so familiar to people and fairly short, we're beefing up this episode a little bit by including other tales in this same kind of vein and genre, because I want to drive home the point that this story originally was very much about tricking people and making a fool out of other people, so that I could show you how much it's changed. I think you'll get it. And I think you'll enjoy the fact that we've got some fun stories. So first, Geoff is going to tell the story of robbers cunning against another robber. And this is ATU 1525, so different from Stone Soup, but still within that larger classification that they're all lumped together, which is the clever man.
A robber's cunning against another robber. So there was a gentleman who was a big landowner in a foreign country, which I thought was an interesting detail. And he rented his farms out to farmers who stocked them with sheep. Do you need to know that he stocked them with sheep? No, but he rented out this land to other people. And he had working for him an agent who just went around the farms every 6 months and collect the rents from these farmers. And this had been going on for a while. It was business as usual until one afternoon it wasn't. Because when this agent was returning after having collected all the rent money, he entered into a dense, dark wood. And the title of the story may have tipped you off to the fact that he was accosted by a robber who surprised him by jumping out of the woods and demanded he give him, I need to use not just pronouns there because that could be confusing. And the robber demanded that the agent of this landowner give him all the money or he was going to take his life. And so the agent begs the robber to spare his life, hands over all the rent money, and goes on his not so merry way. 6 months later, the next time the agent's going on the rounds collecting the rents, the robber was there again. And so the agent had to go back to the landowner without any of the rent money. And the gentleman, landowner, was in a terrible rage about losing a whole year's worth of rents. And the agent, next time rent collecting time came around, was like, look, there's no point in me going because I'm going to do all this work and then come back. And as soon as he went through those same woods again, well, I mean, maybe he had to go through those woods. What, he could not have found another route or something? I don't know. Anyway, I'm just realizing this plot hole in the moment myself. But anyway, he's like, I'm just going to come, do all that work, come back. And as soon as I'm coming back, I'm going to get robbed and you're not going to get your money. So like, what's the point? So they went a little while, the landowner and the agent, without collecting any of this money. Because they're like, yeah, why do all the work and then just get it taken from us to give to someone else? Like, we'll wait and bide our time and see what we can do. Try to come up with a plan to get around this big problem. When one afternoon, a big burly man knocked at the gentleman's door, asking to see the gentleman specifically. And so this burly man was shown in, because when a burly man comes knocking at your door, in many connotations, you oblige him.
Yes, I do.
And so he was shown in.
Oblige him all over the place.
So this big burly man was shown in to see the gentleman, and the gentleman asked him, "What do you want?" "Big burly man, sir." And so the big burly man said, "Well, I just heard that your agent has been robbed of your rent 2 or 3 times now." And the gentleman's like, "Yeah, that's right. But this Robert?
But this Robert."
Like, the gentleman said, "Yeah, that's right. But this robber is like impossible to catch. So we don't know what we're supposed to do about it." So this big burly man's like, "Listen, this isn't a problem. I think that I am just as clever of a robber as this guy is. All right. So what I want you to do is let me go and collect your rents for you. And I promise that I'll bring the rents back or I'll be dead because the robber will kill me. Maybe. All that I want is I want to meet this robber to see if I can beat him at his own game. Game recognizes game, you know? Robber's trying to see if he's got it or not. Actually, he's not. He knows he does, or he thinks he does. He's confident. And the gentleman just laughed in this burly man's face, this burly robber's face. And he was like, well, if you, a robber, a self-professed and confessed robber in my very presence, go to collect my rents, then I'm not going to see them again. I'm just going to get robbed by you instead of robbed by that other robber. And so the big burly robber was like, listen, it's not the rents that I want, but I just want to see if I can get the best of this other guy, you know? It's like, I promise I'll bring you your rents.
He's robbing not even for like this stuff. He's doing it for the clout.
Yeah, purely.
Or not even just like the clout, the thrill of the game.
Yeah, he just loves it. He's like, listen, all this regular robbing is too easy.
I need next level robberies under my belt.
Yeah, I need to rob a robber so that I can rob someone that knows what it's like to be robbed and knows how to prevent being robbed because they're the ones that are doing it. But I need to beat them at that, you know, to know that I am the best around.
He's the best around.
That came into my head too. That came into my head before I said it, you know, but instead of singing it, I said it because it had come into my head like that. But it came into my head as you sang it, but I just talked it with my regular words. So the burly man's just like, look, man, let me give it a shot. And so the gentleman's like, okay, well, if I send my agent, like he's just going to get robbed anyway. So I might as well lose my rents one way or the other. At least this way, we maybe have a chance of you being an honest robber and coming back and giving me this money. But he's like, whatever, I'm not going to see my money. Go have fun, sir. And so he made up his mind to give the robber a try.
Knock yourself out.
And the robber's like, okay, I'm going to need a few things. Let me have your agent's clothes. Because he wanted to look just like the agent so that maybe the robber would just suspect he was the same person. And so
the same person, but that had been like training all year. So now he's like jacked, like
exactly.
big burly. Yeah.
So yeah, they fitted him up just like the agent as best as they could. I'm sure they had to like take out the seams of whatever pants and shirts that he was wearing. So that
it's fine. I'm imagining a montage.
There you go. Of like the tailor with like the tape around them and like,
yeah.
And like he's walking out of like the dressing room and like the agent and the gentleman are sitting there and like with some they're like no and others they're like yes. And then at the end of this beautiful montage the burly man walks on out into the world to go collect these rents, and he does so, and then he starts to return home and he gets to those same dense woods that the other agent kept getting robbed in. And wouldn't you know it, the robber came out and demanded the money, threatening to kill this big burly robber. And so the big burly robber handed over the money and pretended to be like super afraid. And he's like, listen, I can't go home to my master having had the rent stolen from me again. Like he's so mad. What I need you to do is like, can you like at least shoot my hat like 2 or 3 times? So it looks like I tried to, you know, like escape with it, but you were shooting at me. He's like, okay, sure. Boom, boom, boom. The robber shoots, you know, a few shots into the hat. And he's like, okay, well, it's got to look realistic. Okay, like here's my coat. He takes off his coat. Shoot a couple through the flap of my coat. And so the robber's like, okay, fine. Bam, bam, shoots another couple through the coat. And the robber is like, okay, my gun is empty. Like I can't shoot anything else to make this look realistic. Can we just like go on our way? And so the big burly robber's like, well, if your gun is empty, then mine is full. And he whips out his gun and robs the robber. Which actually he doesn't. He doesn't rob the robber. He takes the robber prisoner and hauls him off to the gentleman's house where the gentleman has it. Gentleman?
Mm-hmm.
Gentleman. Where the gentleman has him locked up and, you know, imprisoned. Same thing as locked up. Where the gentleman has him locked up. Period. Don't put the period in there. That was just for me. Period.
No one else gets it. It's only for me.
Me and you. And so the big burly robber goes back into the woods and he finds the robber's lair. And in that lair, there's a big haul of money and jewelry and all this stuff. And so the big burly robber, was able to return to the gentleman all of the rents that had been stolen to him.
Ooh.
Stolen from him.
Yep.
And the gentleman was super happy. And he's like, here, you know, like, here, I'll give you some money. Like you saved me. Like I want to repay you. And the robber's like, no, I didn't do it for the reward. I just did it. Like I said, I wanted to see if I could outwit the robber. And I did. And now the rest of the spoil is mine.
Yeah.
So I bid you adieu. And he bounced, much richer having robbed the robber and getting like the robbed stuff that the robber had robbed from the other people that didn't have such a big burly robber to get it back for them. The end.
That's awesome.
The end happened before, but then I added weird stuff at the end there too. But
We love it. The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
I was like, when the robber first showed up, I was like, it's the same robber. It's the robber that's been doing it like in disguise. And he's just like going to try to like steal something else from it. Like I kept waiting for like the robber to be tricking like them both. Not just the other robber. You know what I mean? It's like he's going to go out and he's going to like rob the robber. Or it's like he and the robber are working together from the beginning and somehow this is going to be like a scheme. But there's like, oh no, he's like actually doing this stuff. And I was like waiting for him to like rob the gentleman and the robber and, you know, double cross everybody.
At first, because this is like a British tale, I also was wondering, because it's like the title's like robbers cunning against another robber. And so at first I thought that the person that the robber that the robber was robbing was the landowner.
Like it's like a statement like oh, the landowner's like robbing these people.
Yeah, because in a lot of like Irish tales,
they're like the landlord is like the villain.
Yeah. And so I was kind of like, oh, is the robber who's being robbed, is it actually the landowner? And they're like, oh, because this guy is such like a jerk. But no, this way was good too.
I had a similar thought to that as well. But I was the first time I read it, obviously. And I was quickly disabused of that notion.
Indeed.
Loved
it. Love that we're associating with these like tale types that it's like when you're a clever man, your cleverness manifests by you thieving from other people.
But this one, it was helping people with his cleverness.
Yeah, he was a little bit Robin Hood, you know.
Yeah. He was just evil enough to still be lovable, but not evil, you know what I mean? Like he's bad enough, just bad enough to be sexy, but not so bad that you're like, oh, actually it's a turnoff, you know? Yeah. He's the level of bad that we all want in a big burly man.
I know I do.
But I also loved the detail of like how he tricked the robber, being like, oh man, like put some shots into my hat, put some shots into my coat. He's like, here, put some shots into my shoes. Like, man, I can't shoot anything else. I'm all out of bullets. He's like, well, I'm not. Love it.
Yeah, that felt very American to me. Like it felt very Wild West.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it was like, oh, perfect. So the next story is ATU 1529, Thief as Donkey. But I want you to pay attention to who is the thief.
And who is the donkey.
Because it'll be interesting when we then jump over to Stone Soup and that ATU type. Because still we're in the realm of the clever man as thief, clever man as tricking people into getting things from them.
Yeah.
And so this story is called Monks and the Donkey. And versions of this story have been found in England and in West Virginia.
Oh, I've been there.
Yeah. Which I'm like, obviously, I don't know how many monks have been walking around the countryside in West Virginia. And so this story, like, it's one of those stories where we talk about how, like, the Scots-Irish brought a lot of their, like, storytelling traditions to...
Yeah, like, similar to how there was, like, the king of Pennsylvania and, like, Maryland and West Virginia in that other story. It was like,
yes.
Wait a minute.
That's what somebody recently asked me. They were like, have you found the Princess of Ohio while you've been, like, out there? I'm like, hilarious. I am the Princess of Ohio. She said boldly. Wow. So, the monks and the donkey. So, there were once 3 monks who traveled the countryside and the towns asking people for food and anything else they could give to bring back to the monastery. So very much a monastic life, living on alms and anything that they received from like other people. And they were walking through the country, and after going to a lot of different houses, they were getting loaded down with all of the food and alms that people were willing to give them. And the head monk who was there, he was like, okay, my arms are getting really tired. We're all holding as much as we can hold. I don't know how much longer we can keep doing this. This is getting like really exhausting. What can we do about this? And so he's looking around and he sees that there is a donkey tied up in one of the farmer's fields. And so he turns to one of the other monks and he's like, hey, can you go and untie that donkey and bring it here so that we can load all the stuff up onto the donkey the rest of the way home? And the monk was like, well, what do I do if the farmer finds me and I've like stolen his donkey? And the head monk was like, oh, you know what? Just tie yourself up in the place of the donkey.
Okay.
The monk was like, oh, okay, that's fine. And so he goes over to the donkey and he unties it, sends it off to the other monks. They load up the stuff and they head off, and he just ties himself up where the donkey had been. And so the two monks and the donkey, they went back to the monastery. And when the farmer comes out, he like looks over and obviously is surprised to see a monk tied up where he had left a donkey. And the monk turns to him, he says, brother, do not be afraid. I'm just like imagining like the angels that come down to the shepherds and the like nativity story in the Bible with they're like, fear not, neither be afraid. We bring great tidings of glad news, or glad tidings of great news, something. You
Great
get it.
joy.
Oh, great.
Good tidings of great joy. Your donkey is now a monk.
But anyways, he's like, brother, do not be afraid. Come, untie me, and everything will be okay. For I was a sinner, and God punished me by turning me into a donkey. And the farmer was like, oh no, I am so sorry. I have been so mean to you because like you were such a badly behaved donkey. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have beat you as much as I did. I shouldn't have worked you as hard as I did. Oh my gosh, like I'm so sorry. And the farmer, like as the farmer's like untying this guy and like apologizing profusely like to this monk, the monk was just like, oh no, like it's totally fine. It's perfectly okay. That was part of my punishment. Like I had to get beaten and work so hard like that so that I could like turn back into the monk that I am. Thank you so much. You're wonderful. You're going to be so blessed. Thank you. And like it just walked off down the road back to the monastery. So a few days after this, there was a fair in that part of the county or in that part of the country, somewhere. It was nearby. There was a fair. And the monks were like, oh, you know what? We don't need this donkey anymore now that we've got this stuff, but we could get money for this donkey if we go and we sell it. So they were like, oh, sure, that sounds great. So they sent the donkey off to the fair. They did not go like with the donkey, which is good because then he be seen. But anyway, the farmer, hearing that there's going to, be this fair, he thought to himself, well, I'm gonna be needing a new donkey, so I better go out to the fair and see if I can find a new donkey. And so when he gets there, he immediately sees his donkey and recognizes it right away. And so he like walks over to the donkey and whispers in its ear, monk, what did you do this time to be turned into a donkey so fast again? And then he turned around and started looking for a different donkey. The end. So yeah, I love that the people who are doing the thieving in this story are the monks. Mm-hmm. Because it's not necessarily like a group of people that you like think to yourself like, oh, I bet they're just like wandering through towns and are like stealing from people. For sure. Especially when in this story, like people are so giving to them anyway, that it almost was like, dude, why didn't you just ask the farmer if you could borrow his donkey for like 20 minutes or whatever? But it's like, no, we're going to steal it instead.
Because how are we supposed to have fun? What's fun about that? What's fun about asking someone to borrow their donkey? Yeah. Nothing.
When you would have the opportunity to like tie yourself to the fence and then be like, I was your donkey.
And trick people into thinking, look, I mean, it's performing a very important religious purpose too, which is to be like a warning against sin. Be like, hey, look, if you sin, you could also be turned into a donkey. So, they were doing the Lord's work by tricking people and stealing from them.
Indeed. You're right. They were teaching that man a religious lesson. They were doing their jobs as monks.
Yeah.
To steal from people sometimes is to elicit a religious experience.
Yeah, it was the price that this man paid for the lesson learned against his will.
Dude, what's funny is like that's exactly the pivot that like Stone Soup thematically took from being like basically that to being like, oh, actually, if with a few little tweaks, we could actually make this a story with like a good moral.
A good ending. Yeah.
Yeah. Because now, as we pivot, so Stone Soup. So the different versions of this tale will have slightly different characters fooling slightly different characters. So sometimes you have pilgrims who are on a pilgrimage so it's like they're on like this like religious journey and they are trying to trick people in the city out of their food. Or there's a version in England called the Friar and the Whetstone. And yeah, it's a friar and he tricks like this like old woman out of her food. And the ones in the United States tend to be a tramp going to like a rich farmer's house. Usually like a farmer who like has several like servants working for him. And so it's like, it's funny because in like the US, it's like they take that kind of like religious figure that might be found on the road. And instead they're like in the US, who's typically found on the road?
Tramps.
Yeah, like a homeless person. Tramps. And who do we not mind them tricking food out of? Rich farmers who already have like servants and like plenty of goods.
Plenty.
And then there are other stories where it is soldiers returning from war. And so they're on foot trying to like find their way back home. And they stop someplace because they need some food to eat.
Interesting.
But the one that I'm going to be retelling, it is Pebble Soup. And this version is from France. And you have the story starting off, we're back to the monks. We've got two monks passing through a village in Normandy. And they come across a peasant's house around dinner time. And they knocked on the door, and there were just children inside. And the monks asked the children, do you have any food in the house that we can have? And the children are like, no, we're really poor. Like, I don't think that we have like anything that we can give out to you. And so the monks were like, okay, well, you know what? We don't really need you to feed us. We just were wondering if you could fetch us some water and maybe light a fire because we have pebbles that we can turn into soup if we just have a fire and some water. And the kids were like, oh, that's all? Yeah, we can do that. Our parents would allow us to do that for you. And so one of the kids set about getting the fire all set up, and another one like went down so that they could, whether it was like a well, river, wherever, went to fetch water and came back. And so they put the pot on with the water inside, and the monks came and dropped their pebbles into the bottom of the soup. And the kids were like, those are just pebbles. And the monks were like, well, of course, don't you know that we can make our own soup with pebbles? And they were like, I've never seen that done. That seems very strange to me. And the monks were like, well, it is strange, but we can teach you our secret. All you have to do is start boiling some water and throw in some clean pebbles. And they were like, oh, okay, that's no problem. And so the monks, after they'd boiled it for a while, they took a little sip, and the kids asked, like, how is it? Is that good? And they were like, it's fine. It tastes okay. It would taste better if we had maybe some like just a little bit of herbs. And some of the kids were like, oh, well, we have some herbs out in the garden. And they're like, oh, would you be able to go and fetch those for us? And they're like, sure, no problem. And so the kids like ran out into the garden, started pulling out like the herbs, and then coming inside and like dumping them into the pot, letting it like boil for a little bit. Then the monks took a sip of the soup and they tasted it, and they're like, oh, That's really good. You know, it'd be even better if we had just like a little bit of butter, maybe a little bit of salt. And the kids were like, oh, yeah, I think we have some butter and some salt. And they ran off and they got the butter and the salt and they put it like in and it's going and going. And the monks kind of sat and said to themselves, man, if only you guys had like a garden, this soup would taste even better if you had any cabbages or onions, any kind of vegetable, really. That would cook up really nice with the pebbles. And the kids were like, oh, we do have some of that in the garden. So the kids run out into the garden and start pulling up like the vegetables and they chop them up and throw them into the pot. And they're like, oh, that's really good. Man, you know what goes really well with soup is some bread. And the kids were like, oh, well, we have some bread. And so they brought down the bread. And once they brought down the bread, the monks were like, well, I think the soup is just about ready. And so they poured up bowls for everybody. And the kids sat down and were dunking their bread in this. And they were like, oh, man, this is the best soup I've ever had. This is amazing. And the monks were like, yeah, and can you believe we made it all from some pebbles? And the kids were like, wow, that's really something. And the monks to the children, they were like, you know what we'll do? We'll scoop out the pebbles at the bottom, we'll wash them off, and then anytime you want to make stone soup, you have the stones to do it. And the kids were like, oh, thanks, sirs. And so the monks gave the little kids the pebbles and left. And then when the parents came in from like working all day, they were like, what is this? And the kids were like, it's stone soup. We made all of this from stone. And they recounted what had happened to their parents, and all the people laughed at the simplicity of children. But like the children, they too will allow themselves to be tricked by the first rogue who comes their way. It's like the end of this story is like, they may laugh at the children, but we've all done stupid things like these children, which I think is such a wild take for this story to take, especially because the version that I know, and I feel like most people are now more familiar with, is that over time in modern years, as that story has been told, not just by like John Month that I mentioned that had his story like taking place in China, but even in Bone Button Borscht, like that story has been slowly morphing to be not about a person who tricks, but about teaching a community a lesson. And so I'm like, by retelling the story slightly differently, because I don't want to like bore everybody who gets where this is going, the versions that I have heard told more modernly, it's usually somebody like a monk, or in the case of the one in China, I cannot remember if his had soldiers or if it was like soldiers returning from battle, or if it was like Buddhist monks returning. Because there's another version that's set in China by a different author that's called like The Real Story of Stone Soup. I love how authors will like pick titles to be like, but that's not how it really happened. This is the real story. And then people are like, oh, have you heard the original? And then I'm like, no, that's not how any of this works.
Yeah.
But in the versions that resonate with me, and so maybe I have created this like amalgamation in my own brain, and it's me, Katrina of the fairy tellers, is like the storyteller, because my version of the story, the one that I have in my brain, is that you have a person who's like a monk or a soldier or like a Buddhist priest, somebody coming into a village, and they are on some kind of long journey and they need help. And they come to a town where everybody in the town is hiding away in their own houses because they've been devastated by war. And so because they've been devastated by war, they're holding on to the resources that they have in their own house. And this religious figure comes into town and all he's got with him is a pot. They see him in the town square as he starts to get his fire going under his pot. And one little kid will like venture out of a house and go up to the man and be like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm just making myself some stone soup. I've been walking a long time and I've gotten really, really hungry. And the kid's like, what's in stone soup? Because the kid also was really, really hungry.
Mhm.
The guy's like, well, I just take a stone that I find by the brook when I'm getting some water, and I put it into my pot and I start boiling it so that I have some good stone soup. And the kid's like, I've never heard of anybody doing anything like that. But I know where we have stones and where we have water. And so the kid takes him down to where either there's a well or a river or whatever. He takes him down over there. They find a big stone to put in his pot, and they put it in his pot and they set it to boiling. And now by this time, other people in their houses, they're looking out going, what in the world? Like, what are they doing? What's going on? And so they'll send somebody in their family out. And the kid will walk out and be like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, and the little kid's, oh, he's teaching me how to make stone soup. And they're like, I've never seen anybody make that from a stone. And pretty soon the guy's like, oh, do you know what would make this stone soup taste even better? If anybody had a carrot or a potato that we could throw into it. And if you have a potato or something, if you add something to it, we'll share our soup with you. And the kid's like, oh, okay, I'll go do that. And he runs back home and tells his family, oh, he's making stone soup. And if we add something to it, then we can have some of it. And the family's like, all right, well, all we have are these like 3 potatoes. And they're like, okay, we'll give him. So they give him the 3 potatoes. And then somebody else is like, oh, I have a couple onions from my garden. I have that. And so pretty soon you've got everybody in the whole town, instead of hiding out in their own houses, guarding their limited resources, they're bringing them out. They're sharing them together until you have this like massive pot of a really flavorful stew because it has everybody's contributions inside of it. And now everybody in the town gets to have like a nice, warm, flavorful meal, eat their fill, and all they had to do was share a little bit of what they had, and they end up with a pot of food that they couldn't have made on their own, a dinner that they couldn't have put together for their own family, let alone the whole town, if they had stayed inside of their house. Then when the guy goes to leave and everybody's taken the leftover soup back into their house, and he cleans out his pot and he starts going, and the kid's like, oh, where are you going? And he's like, well, I've got to keep going on my journey. But if you want, I can leave you the stone so that your village can make stone soup whenever they want. And he leaves them the stone and walks away. The thing that he leaves them with, it's like, yes, it's a stone. It's a stone that it didn't actually make any of the food. But it's a symbol that when you all come together as a town, when everybody shares their resources, you are able to have more than you would have had by yourself. And so that version of the story is like so different from like these monks came into town and like tricked these children and made fools out of them, as they make fools out of us all. It's like no, completely different, same story, slight different tweaks to become like this really important message. And over time, it has gotten likened more and more to the allegory of the long spoons. Have you ever heard the allegory of the long spoons?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I have heard a story about the long spoons that I think is what you're talking about, but you could just come out with something wild that I'm like, oh no, that's not what I heard.
No, I think it'll be like pretty standard. Because the allegory of the long spoons, it's a story that's supposed to teach, like it's I think a rabbinic story. I think it's been like attributed to Judaism, like Buddhism, like a lot of different religious flavors. Because like it's a story where it's like whoever said it, it's kind of like a human truism.
Yeah, and it's like a super common thing that lots of religions teach is like, be kind to one another, help one another.
Yeah, be kind to one another, treat each other. And so this story, it gets attributed to Rabbi Kam of Rome Shishuk. I'm so sorry for everything that I mispronounced just then, but a rabbi. It's usually like attributed to one rabbi. And like basically what it says is that I think it's like it's teaching the difference between heaven and hell. In both locations, the inhabitants of those places, those kingdoms or whatever, they have access to unlimited food, but the only utensil that they have to access the food with are really long spoons, utensils that are really long, unwieldy, or like really long chopsticks. It depends on, what. So the chopsticks are so long, or the spoons are so long, that you can't feed yourself with them. And so if you are in hell, you have this unlimited food, but the people won't cooperate with each other. They're not thinking about other people or how they can take care of other people. And so they end up constantly starving, even though there's unlimited food, because they're unwilling to help others. While in heaven, same thing, unlimited food, but the people who are in heaven all know that everybody can get fed as long as they feed each other. And so it's this idea that like how you choose to be in the world and the people that are around you, how they choose to be in the world can dictate whether or not you have like a pleasurable experience or a horrible experience. Because like even in that scenario, because like obviously on earth, we're not in hell and we're not in heaven. We're surrounded by a mix of people. Mm-hmm. Some people who would use that spoon to help feed you, and others. So if you're a person who you're fully willing to help feed other people with the spoon, but you've surrounded yourself with people who are unwilling to feed you, then like you could be feeding people all day long and not get anything. And so that complicates things. Like with the allegory of the long spoons is that we're not currently in heaven or hell. And so you have to be mindful of like who you are picking and choosing to like surround yourself with and how you come to like the table.
Yeah. And there's lots of interesting things about that too. It's like who you're surrounding yourself with, but also like say that it's just like you're not choosing who these people are, like just in life, how it is too. Like you didn't choose, I mean, to some degree you choose the people that are in your life, but sometimes like you live in a neighborhood or a community, like that's the one you were born in and you never left, you can't afford to leave or whatever, for whatever reason, like we do have some degree of choice, but like whatever group of people you're around, there are people that are helping, there are people that aren't helping. And also, well, I guess the point I was trying to make with it was trying to help the people that are around you, which would be if there was like a big group of people that were all around there too. But it's like even noticing who's not helping people, that's one thing. But then notice like the people who aren't getting help, you know what I mean? And then being like, oh, I noticed that person's not being helped. And here I am being helped. Let me see who the person is that's not really being helped and maybe like be able to reach out to them. Like I just like how many different ways that you can look at it and think about it and how that like allegory like really works on so many levels.
Yeah. It's interesting because like I've seen this like online where people talk about how people show up in society and you can see, I've heard people say like, oh, you can see that, we'll never live in a perfect society because people don't return their shopping carts. Mm-hmm. You have people who just decide to just leave them in the parking lot instead of bringing them back. Yeah. They just like make that decision. But also at the same time, I've been at like Aldi's, and Aldi's is a store in the United States, in some regions of the United States. I've never lived anywhere near an Aldi's until now, where to get a cart out, they've incentivized people by locking all the carts together. And the only way that you can unlock a cart and get your own cart is by using a quarter. You push a quarter in and it unlocks the cart closest to you so that you can pull it out. But you don't get your quarter back unless you click yours back in. And at Aldi's, I have noticed more often than not only have people returned their shopping cart, but they will park their shopping cart close to where the carts are supposed to go back. Yeah. Not close enough to get their quarter back.
Yeah, they leave it there, but not get the quarter back. Just leave it there so someone else doesn't have to use a quarter to be able to get a cart. I've seen that too. And there's so many times where like someone has gotten put their cart back and gotten their quarter back, but like I'm walking into the store at the same time and they're like, oh, here's a quarter, to get a cart with. Like I've had that happen to me personally many times.
Me too.
And I haven't gone to Aldi that often, honestly.
Yeah. And so it's like more often than not, what I am seeing is that like, because in other places, you're noticing more the carts that don't get put back.
Yeah, because the cars that get put back are put back, and you don't,
Yeah. And so when they don't get put back, they irritate you. And so people go, oh, obviously the world is full of horrible people.
Mm-hmm.
But then because of the way that the Aldi's system is set up, I have the opportunity to see how many people not only are, yes, incentivized to bring back their shopping cart and get their quarter back and whatever. And so they're like, fine, I'll return this but I don't see the carts in the parking lot with the quarter still in. People walk it all the way back to the door.
Yeah.
And leave the quarter in still.
Yeah. It's not like, oh, I don't have to return this because I paid my quarter to not have to return it. It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah. And also like that type of person is not going to be going to be like, I'm going to go and return it all the way and not have to, I don't know. They're not going to be doing the nice thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you're doing the nice thing, you're not going to leave it in the middle of the parking lot. It's like two nice things,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like what you're saying is that a regular parking lot biases you towards seeing the people that are doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But the way that all these shopping cart situation works, you don't see the people that are just in it for themselves, paying with the thing and putting it back. Like you do see that people are putting it back, but it's like, but they're doing it for their selfish reasons because they want their quarterback. But what you do see are the cases that stand out more are the good ones, where it's like someone brought their cart all the way back here, but then they didn't lock it up to get their quarterback, or someone's handing me a quarter so that I can get the shopping cart. So it's like the whole experience emphasizes the positive rather than a normal parking lot, which like points out the negative.
Yeah. And so like to me, it just shows that it's like, yes, will there always be people in our society who are like, oh, I don't want to bring the shopping cart back. I don't want to do the right thing. I don't want to be minorly inconvenienced by like the shopping cart. I'm going to leave it for somebody else to like deal with. Yeah, those people are always going to exist. That is true. That's human nature. That is true. But also there are just as many people who will not only return their cart, do the thing that you're supposed to do, return the cart. But there are also the people who will return the cart and try to pay goodness forward when they can. And it's like, it's such a small gesture. It's such a small gesture because it's 25 cents. But also sometimes you're like, I don't know when I'm going to be able to find another quarter. And so like, it's things like that. And so with the story Stone Soup, the reason why I've been thinking about it so much recently and like with the political climate is that when times are really stressful and uncertain, sometimes the human reaction, the human response is to kind of like go inward to shrink your community. Like in this story, when the people are like, we've been through a lot, whether it's like natural disasters, they've seen war, whatever, and they're afraid to share any of their resources. They're coming from like a scarcity mindset because things have been so divided, so scary. They want to just like hoard their resources. And resources, not just like physical resources, but also like the untangible resources that people can bring. Metaphorical resources.
Yeah.
Non-food resources, I guess, is what I mean, instead of metaphorical resources. But people like want to close off from everybody when that urge needs to be like fought against, when coming together as like a community, whether it's just to create a sense of community or a sense of that there is help available for me, there is care available for me, and thinking about too, what can I bring to put in the pot? Like those thoughts outward are what is going to get people through the hardest, scariest, most stressful times. And so I don't know, I've just been thinking about sitting down and like writing like what can I bring to a metaphorical pot to make the world a better place? And one of those things that I can bring to the metaphorical pot are stories that connect people. Stories that can make us feel like, yeah, we're all in different countries. We are in different stages of our lives, but stories can help us feel like we're part of a larger community than just our local community. We share human traits and dreams no matter where we are.
Thank you for listening to The Fairy Tellers. If you enjoy what we're doing, please leave us a review or share us with your friends. For access to exclusive bonus content, consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thefairytellers. Special thanks to Andy Forey for our music and to Clarice Inch for our artwork. And of course, a big thank you to all our patrons. Without all of you, this show wouldn't be possible.
Good stories pay little attention to cultural or linguistic frontiers. The student of story collections find themselves adrift on an ocean of stories, an ocean which is boundless, deep, and ceaseless in motion. Robert Irwin.
It's the envelope. It's not me. It's not me, Queen Bee. She just is like, why didn't you become a doctor? Just kidding. My mom has never said that to me. She's very proud and supportive of anything that I choose to do, except for drugs and murder and crime in general. Okay.
What is his name? William
Shakespeare.
No. Oh my gosh. Katrina, no. Oh, ew. Katrina, what are you listening to? And I just loved hearing his horrified little screams. Side effects may include constipation, diarrhea, and abnormal erections.
That's amazing.
And I'm like, I love that so much.